Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our today's webinar. Thank you for joining the Office of Court Administration. My name is Neetu Gill, and I will be today's moderator. I am the project coordinator in the Research and Court Services Division here at the Office of Court Administration. The Research and Court Services Division moderates a webinar each month, and today's topic is A Matter of Life and Death, Protective Orders and Misdemeanor Crimes of Domestic Violence. The speaker for today is Ms. Kimberly Pachowiak. She is a domestic violence training attorney with the Office of Court Administration. Prior to beginning the presentation, I would like to address a few housekeeping details. Please mute your microphone. If you have a question, please use the chat box. I will be monitoring the chat box throughout the webinar. If there is a technical question, such as you can't hear or you can't see the screen, please let me know and I'll address that immediately. If it is a question pertaining to the content, please go ahead and type that in the chat box and we will address that at the conclusion of the presentation. Without further ado, I want to welcome today's speaker, Ms. Kimberly Pachowiak. Like I said, she is a domestic violence training attorney for the Texas Office of Court Administration since 2012. She received her BA in criminal justice in 1989 from UTSA and her JD from St. Mary's University of Law in 1992. Before coming to OCA, Kimberly prosecuted family violence cases for 20 years. First with the Bexar County District Attorney and then with the San Antonio City's Attorney's Office. While with the city, Kimberly implemented and supervised the Family Violence Prosecution Program at San Antonio Municipal Court. She is also a T-Cole certified police instructor. Welcome, Kimberly.
Good afternoon, Neetu. Thank you so much. I guess we are ready to get started. How are y'all doing out there? I hope you don't mind. I'm going to be messing with the computer a little bit and I'm not always really great at it, so there you go. As advertised, I am a, hold it, why is it not going? There we go. As advertised, I am a recovering prosecutor, so that will definitely come out. I am a domestic violence training attorney for the judiciary at this point, but sometimes my prosecution stuff kind of leaks out sometimes. But it has more to do with caring about the topic and making sure that we are looking at family violence cases and domestic violence cases through the lens that we need to in order to understand it and be able to handle it in our court system. But being the lawyer that I am, I always have a couple of disclaimers. First one, as you can see from the screen, I'm not always sarcastic. Sometimes I am sleeping. We speak fluent sarcasm at our house. And my kiddo, when he was 2 or 3, that was really kind of cute. He's 12 now. It is not so cute anymore. But it definitely is something that helps me be able to do the work I do, especially when I was prosecuting, getting up and doing that work every day. If you don't look for some ways to find the funny and have a bit of a twisted sense of humor, it makes it really tough to get out of bed. And I guarantee I'm not the only one here. I know there's a lot of you out there that, you know, let's face it, we do not have happy jobs. We may love our jobs, but we do not have happy jobs. And being able to keep our sanity is definitely an important thing. And, you know, I'm always going to prefer to laugh over crying any day. Seriously, this was me when I was in prosecution. Sustained. Prosecution will refrain from going dun 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 during witness testimony. Anything to kind of keep my sanity, I always did. Has nothing to do with caring about the topic. As you will be able to tell, this is definitely a topic I care very deeply about, but again, we've got to keep our sanity. So today we're going to talk about a bunch of different things, and my next disclaimer is this is not, I would love for it to be, this is not a tutorial, this is not a how-to of any very specific things, but that is certainly something we can do at a later time. And please let us know in the chat box if there is a specific topic, and you'll have the opportunity to do that later or also in the evaluation. Today is just an overview, so we're just going to kind of touch base on a few things. Specifically, we talk about dynamics and prevalence. I pretty much never do one of these presentations without covering some of that, because I think being able to know what it is we're dealing with and how widespread it can be makes it a little easier for us to understand why we got to do what we do with these cases. We will talk a little bit about potential indicators of future violence. Basically, family violence is a course of conduct crime. It's not necessarily one of those things where it's one and done and that's it. there tends to be a pattern and there tends to be things that happen. And we're going to talk about what some of those indicators are and who are the potential victims. We are going to go into the link between domestic violence and mass shootings. We know that domestic violence does not stay home. It goes to school, it goes to work, it goes to the grocery store. And so it's important to kind of keep in mind that what we're dealing with when we're dealing with family violence is certainly something that is not just a private matter between people in their home. We're going to talk a little bit about protective order reporting. And when I say reporting, I mean reporting to our statewide database, TCIC. While that is done by law enforcement, pretty much everybody that is on this webinar right now, if you have anything to do, if you touch protective order paperwork, however, whatever your role is, being able to look at certain things and streamline processes and make sure that information is accurate goes a long way in speeding up the process, and that we have good information, because we've got to know about those protective orders. Law enforcement needs to know, courts need to know, a lot of people need to know. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to go into misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence. And the reason that's all capitalized is that's actually a term of art for the federal side. Basically, it's one of the things that stops someone from being able to purchase a firearm along with protective orders if they have a domestic violence type of case on their record. However, there's definitely been some movement on this, and some in recent years, some new experiences and some new things that have happened where this is going to be an issue for a much greater number of courts. So that being said, of course, we're talking about family violence from Texas Family Code 71002 and 710021. And it's all of these different types of relationships. And then Texas and in many other states, we have the very broad definition. Instead of domestic violence, we have family violence. So not only does it include the ones here on the right, which would normally kind of be seen as domestic violence because it has to do with an intimate partner, spouses, current or former, child in common, current or former dating partners, including rivals. So if a former intimate partner assaults a person's current intimate partner, then that's going to count as domestic violence as well. And then anybody who has shared a household or related by any type of blood or marriage type relationship. And so all of those together are family violence. But the subset that we're going to be kind of looking at when it comes to dynamics today is domestic violence. And these intimate partner relationships, because that's kind of where the dynamics make it really, really crazy. So first of all, honoring Texas victims. And at Texas Council on Family Violence, I'm sure a lot of you are aware, they do amazing, wonderful stuff. One of the things that they do is for almost 30 years, they have been doing this report. And it's about victims who were killed in domestic violence homicides. And in 2017, we had 136 women that were killed by a male intimate partner in 42 Texas counties. Now, their funding stream and how all of that works, that's what they are tasked to track. So, but we know that it does happen both ways. It's still, majority of the time, it is a female that is killed by a male intimate partner, but certainly no, that's not the only way it could happen. And keeping in mind, this is not about family members. This is not about child abuse. This is just intimate partners. It's startling to think about that our youngest victim in an intimate partner homicide was 14 years old. And our oldest was 84 years old. Now, they also, as a parent, I mean, I hate, it's all horrible, but as a parent to think that 211 children lost at least one parent in those incidents in 2017. I am blessed in that I get to work for this office here in Austin, but I actually live in San Antonio, and I get to work from home quite a bit when I'm not traveling all over the state. But so I live in Bexar County, and we had 18. Usually we have about maybe 5 or 6 We have 18 in 2017, and I believe we had even more in 2018. What I love about this particular report, and if you Google it, or if you contact me, I can make sure you get it, or we can see if we can have this available for you. If you just Google Honoring Texas Victims, you'll be able to find the report. There's lots of good information, lots of stats and things that are to kind of bear out some of these things. But the other thing that I like about it is it includes a little snippet about each incident and the names of the victims and their children and all of that stuff. But as I read through the 18 that were Bexar County, at least half of those, the perpetrator also killed themselves. And so we have babies out there who lost both parents in these situations. We know that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men experience domestic violence at some point in their lifetime. When it comes to serious injury, we know that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have been the victim of severe physical violence in their lifetime. So, as you know, it knows absolutely no gender, race, color, creed, gender identity, sexual orientation, address, education. It's an equal opportunity crime, unfortunately. So it is certainly one of those things that if you are not a victim, you probably know at least one survivor of family violence. In 2017, we had 195,315 reported incidents of family violence in Texas. These are DPS numbers. Now, those are just reported. The actual that actually happened is probably not even, it's probably double that, if not more, because we know it's a very underreported crime. And historically, the great majority of all family violence incidents are assaults, about 96%, and usually 76% of those assaults are classified as simple assaults. So we have the high felony to the lowest misdemeanors, but the great majority of those are those simple assaults, those Class C level offenses. And while I know that this audience is all different types of, in fact, let's go ahead and do our first poll question so we kind of know we've got going on here. Kind of want to see what your role is, so we have a bit of a sense of what we're looking at. We're looking for our poll right now, and hopefully we can pull it up. But basically, I want to see what your jobs are. Are you a judge? Are you a clerk? Are you a court administrator? If you could just really quickly click on the one that applies to you.
We'll give it about another 20 seconds or so.
Yes, that would be good. Got some court clerks, got some judges.
All right, we'll go ahead and close the poll. And the results should have popped up on your screen. Looks like we have 35% judges attending today, 45% of court coordinator and court clerks, 8% of court administrators, and 10% other.
Okay. And the next one that we have, a little bit more specifically the types of, we did roll, right? Okay. Yeah, we go. Yeah, let's, the next one.
Perfect. So the next poll question is, do you hear protective order cases, criminal violence cases, both, or neither? And while people are responding to that question, I do want to address one of the questions that came through. An attendee asked, will this be posted to watch later? This webinar did get filled up, and I do know that some of your colleagues have been pushed out because the webinar is full. No worries, please let them know that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted on our website within the next week and a half. All right, give it about another 10 more seconds, and we'll close this next poll. Okay, let's close that, and I'm going to share the results. So it looks like 22% hear protective order cases, 17% hear criminal family violence, 43% hear both, and 18% hear neither.
Okay. Well, you hear neither. I'm glad you're here anyway. So the thing to kind of keep in mind is I kind of did everything backwards in my career. I started out at the DA's office, first as an intern and then I was hired as a prosecutor. And I actually wound up handling felonies early in my career for a fair amount of time. And then later on running a family violence docket for a county court. Then I had left the DA's office to go into private practice, and then I got a call from the city of San Antonio to set up a municipal docket specifically for family violence cases. So we're talking about our Class C, supposed to be non-injury cases, supposed to be, and of course, they're fine-only cases. And what I will tell you, after handling all different levels of family violence cases, the only difference is the level of injury. Usually what happens is, we may think that this is kind of like a gateway type crime if it's a Class C level case, and sometimes it is. I will guarantee you, though, the first time that the police got called and a case got filed, that was not the first time it happened. And oftentimes there's actually been quite a history, and maybe there's been things that haven't been reported at all. Maybe there are things that were reported that were higher level offenses. But what it tends to mean is that somebody just happened to get to the phone a little quicker this time before serious injury happened. But the terrorism, the fear, the effect on victim, on the children, all of that is very much the same across the board. So it's important to keep in mind that we know that no relationship goes from happy, healthy, and functional to murder-suicide overnight. There's always a pattern of abuse, and that is absolutely true. And in fact, there's several patterns. We do know that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And so giving an idea of what some of these patterns are is really important. And this is definitely one of them. This is the power and control wheel. And it is a tool that has been used in the domestic violence intervention world for almost probably 40 years. First created in Duluth, Minnesota, based upon interviews with thousands of survivors talking about what are some of the things that happen routinely. And they started seeing that there's a lot of things that happen to most victims of family violence, of intimate partner violence. And the physical and sexual violence, just notice that's on the outside, it's kind of the glue that holds it all together. But it's all about the power and control and using intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing, denying, blaming, using kids, using male privilege. Economic abuse is a biggie, and of course, coercion and threats. And you will notice that a lot of the things on here aren't necessarily criminal type behavior, but it certainly is something that really can be used to keep victims under the thumb of their abuser. And when I was prosecuting, I would often use this and explain when a victim would want to come in and try to drop charges. We had a no drop policy in San Antonio. I believe they still do. But when they wanted to come in and say it didn't happen or it was their fault, I would normally be able to at least explain why we're not dropping, and I would show them this, and they would be amazed and shocked at looking at all the different things that are on this wheel that they themselves have been going through. And so, kind of using it as a teaching tool and kind of making them, hoping to make them understand why we need to do what we need to do. Didn't make them necessarily happy all the time, but at least they understood kind of why we needed to do it that way. There's also another pattern, and that pattern is escalation. And it is, we know that things start small, usually. They start with as much physical force as necessary to get the job done. And one of the questions that I pose, especially in my live audience sessions, is why does domestic violence happen? Why is it still here? Why are we still dealing with it? And the short answer is because it works. It gets the abuser, the batterer, what they want, at least in the short term and potentially in the long term. And once a certain level of violence is not working anymore, then it tends to escalate. So once a victim is no longer afraid of just being pushed and yelled at, then that's where we will wind up with higher levels of violence. And then once punching, slapping, that kind of stuff doesn't work anymore, then that's when we go to shooting, stabbing, strangling, killing. And while, thank goodness, not every Class C level offensive contact case winds up as a domestic violence homicide later on, I will guarantee you that every domestic violence homicide at some point started with a push, a grab, a slap. It might have been months ago, it might have been years ago. It just kind of depends on that particular situation. And so if we can deal with at the pushing, shoving, grabbing stage, many jurisdictions have been able to stop it from escalating quite so often to the shooting, stabbing, killing stage. So, potential indicators of future violence, and we're talking about specifically for the survivor themselves, for law enforcement, and for the community at large. For survivors, just having a prior family violence incident is present in about 72% of all domestic violence homicide. These are national numbers. And it's even more so with stalking. 76% of female domestic violence homicide victims in the year before they were killed by their intimate partner were reported being stalked by that intimate partner. Other important lethality factors include that increase the chances of domestic violence homicide. Presence of threats increases it by up to almost 15 times. Exhibition or use or just displaying a weapon 20 times, and that could be something as minor as leaving it on the kitchen table for a couple of days to make a point. Strangulation increases it by almost 10 times. Forced sex by almost 8 times. And extreme jealousy by 9 times. Just a really quick segue, because we could talk a week about strangulation. Actually, we could talk about a week about a lot of this stuff, but definitely about strangulation. One thing we have to keep in mind is that it takes very little pressure and very little and not very long for there to be damage. Within 5 to 10 seconds, can lose consciousness, and death within minutes. The problem is that maybe only about 15% of victims actually have any type of injury that can actually be photographed. And so there is a lot of great information, especially from the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention. And I have a link for them on my next slide. But also Kelsey McKay is going around the world and definitely around Texas. She started out here in Travis County at the Travis County Attorney's Office, DA's office, about strangulation. And strangulation, what we're finding is even though you don't have a lot of injury on the outside, you can have a whole lot of damage on the inside, and you can actually die from a strangulation injury months later, which is absolutely frightening. And for that reason, SB 971 just passed both chambers and has been sent to the governor for signature, and it's going to require law enforcement training for recognizing and documenting strangulation because it is such a huge deal. The other frightening thing is that sometimes grabbing someone by the neck is listed in a Class C family violence case because there's no visible injury on the outside. And so being able to make sure that law enforcement is documenting and doing what they need to do to make sure we're looking at those things can definitely save lives. And also be able to flag this person as someone who, generally what they're finding is that someone who has strangled their intimate partner in the past, more likely to be inclined to commit mass shooting, definitely more likely to kill their victim at some point later on. So there's all kinds of problems with that. So any information that you may need about either lethality or danger assessments, here's the websites. Highly recommend going and taking a look at those if you haven't already. Really good information on that. Okay. We also know that domestic violence is a leading circumstance of fatal officer shooting. In 2016, we had 64 officer shootings that were done in 2016. However, 22% were just from domestic violence calls. The other ones was everything else. And I mean everything else. Shootings at traffic stops, burglary, robbery, any of that stuff. So this is definitely in any of my, if there's any former law enforcement in the house, you definitely can attest to this. My husband is a cop. He's been a cop for 33 years, and we talk about this a lot. Luckily, he is not doing the type of patrol work where he had to go to those, but he certainly did early on in his career. So it is very, very important to keep in mind. That being said, the link between domestic violence and mass shootings, and we're going to talk a fair amount about this probably the rest of the session, because there are definitely some things that have happened, and especially in recent years, that make a big difference on whether or not, let me see here, on whether or not a prior incident can actually predict whether or not there's someone is could be potentially be a mass shooter. And there's a bunch of different predictors. The other thing that there's a bunch of are definitions. I don't know about you guys, but I definitely have noticed on various and sundry media outlets that there are many, many definitions for mass shooting. Federal agencies collect data on active shooters, one or more individuals actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area. Another definition.
Kimberly, before you go on,
Yes.
I just got a noticing that there's some audio problems. That if you cannot hear Kimberly, can you please let us know? I just want to make sure that it's not an individual problem and I'm addressing it right away.
Oh, okay.
So just let me know if you can hear us.
And if I need to get louder, I will. I usually don't need to, but think you need to. So another common definition is through the Congressional Research Service, also federal, that talks specifically about a gunman who kills 4 or more people, selects victims randomly, and y'all, this one makes me crazy because it rules out specifically gang killings or the killing of multiple family members. So those may not get counted as a mass shooting if this is the definition that's being used, and attacks in a public place. So, and there's other definitions as well. These are just two of the biggies. So depending on what media outlet you listen to, and I don't care which one it is, you may hear a very small number, you may hear a very huge number. And it always kind of makes me crazy because, we want to make sure we're thinking about things accurately. And so just kind of as an example, of course, the Texas sniper at the University of Texas Tower in Austin, I'd heard about this all my life. However, did not know until I started doing this work that he had killed his mother and his wife before climbing up on the tower, and ultimately killed 14 people and wounded 31 others. So as an example, and these are real life examples, I tend not to put the names of the shooter in here because I don't want to give them any extra exposure, even if it's just from little old me. The shooter killed 3 people and wounded 9 others at a Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado. He had been accused of domestic violence by 2 of his ex-wives. And so, yeah, by most definition, that's probably going to count. Also, definitely, the shooter at the Pulse nightclub massacre had abused his ex-wife, and I've heard recent reports that there was another ex-wife that had reported domestic violence as well. So, yeah, that's probably going to count. But then you have these. Remember the guy that opened fire at the baseball practice in Washington, D.C. But he had been arrested in 2006 after hitting and choking his foster daughter. But nobody died, so that may or may not get counted. In Italy, Texas, we had a juvenile student who shot a female high school student after a recent breakup. But she didn't die. And I think only one other person was injured. In Michigan, there was a Central Michigan University student who had shot and killed his parents, and he did it in his dorm room, but not a public place, so that might not get counted. And then, of course, in September 2017, in Plano, we had a shooter who killed his estranged wife along with 7 other people during a football viewing party. And if y'all remember this incident, that football viewing party happened at her new home. So it was not a public place. So that may not get counted. So it's just something to think about when we're looking at all these really disparate numbers, and the lens through which we need to look at some of this stuff. Definitely there is a connection, what exactly that is, but we do know that definitely over half, and 57% perpetrator shot a current or former spouse or intimate partner or other family member as part of their mass shooting. And definitely and I would imagine, I'm going to check on the more recent numbers on this. The last ones I had checked before was 2015, but the shooter had a prior domestic violence charge. Number one thing to keep in mind there, prior domestic violence charge. That's not necessarily prior domestic violence. So there's probably a lot that never got charged that happened. So that's definitely an issue. And also maybe got charged, did not get convicted, those types of things. So I'm actually going to try and keep an eye on those numbers a little bit, because I'm wondering, especially recently because of recent events in the last few years, if that's a little higher than that, but we'll have to find out. Hope y'all are still with me. Protective order reporting. We know that after there is an order, we're not going to talk specifically about all there is to know about protective orders, because we don't have that kind of time. And I don't have that kind of energy, and probably neither do you. After the order, we know that the order has to get sent to law enforcement. And in the last couple sessions, a change based on the address is basically now victim's current or last known address. If it is out in the county, it would go to the sheriff. Or if it is in a municipality, it would get sent to the chief of police. And if it's a magistrate's order of emergency protection, the magistrate is responsible for getting it sent. And for regular protective orders, the clerk is responsible for getting it sent. Of course, what needs to be done, this is new from a couple sessions ago. I used to not have a deadline of when it needed to get sent. Now it is by the end of the following business day. It can be sent electronically, and anyone here who is not sending it electronically, please, please, please try to find a way to send it electronically, because it happens a lot quicker. The reason I bring this up is because a jurisdiction that shall remain nameless was sending them by snail mail to an office that was 2 floors above them in the same building. So just say no to that. Do what you can to get that done. I know a lot of people do send it electronically, so always a good idea. And of course, why do we want to send it? And of course, the big reason is that we know that protective orders that cannot be verified often will not be enforced. Law enforcement cannot verify or confirm, and they just have a victim who is telling them about it. Maybe they have a copy of the paperwork, maybe they don't, for various reasons. But if that doesn't get enforced, then our big goals for domestic violence prevention and intervention and safety and accountability are out the window. We want safety of victims and their families. We want accountability for defendants. We get none of that if protective orders do not get sent, and they have to be verified. Case in point, this was in Washington, D.C. About a year and a half ago. This guy assaulted the mother of his 3 children and their youngest, who was a tiny infant at the time, was convicted, placed on parole. Went to prison, got out on parole, and was able to, came over to the house, and they could not confirm as a condition of his parole that there was supposed to be a no contact order. And she told them there's a no contact order. They couldn't confirm it, couldn't verify it. He was told to leave. This was a Friday night. The next morning, she was found dead in the hallway of her house. And her youngest was in a pool of his mother's blood. So it matters. It's a big difference. And I know there's some frustration with protective orders on a regular basis, and we all have frustrations. Trust me, I know. Because the big question is, do protective orders provide safety? And basically fill in the blank. You can yell it at your screen if you want to. What is protective orders are just a piece of what? right? Piece of paper, which is true, not made of Kevlar last time I checked. However, there have been some studies that have been done. And what they know is that for about half of victims, protective order was part of a plan and the violence stopped. And for the other half, violence was significantly reduced. But the big key, again, is enforcement, especially in rural areas. Sometimes we have law enforcement who either have difficulties and or reluctance to determine predominant aggressors. And that makes a big difference with arresting the right person and stopping the right person. Maybe there's fewer resources in rural areas, and sometimes it's just local politics. We all know situations where someone who is doing things that they should not be doing that happen to have friends in high places. So, and unfortunately that's everywhere, that's not just rural, but those are the big issues that really have popped up, and whether or not cases or protective orders are being enforced. So when we're talking about enforcement, we're talking about the alphabet soup. And these are the biggies. Texas Crime Information Center, we know that that is the system that law enforcement will check and run people to see if there's a warrant, is there stolen property, any of that stuff. It's like, usually it's a return in like 7 seconds or less, and whether or not there's a protective order. That feeds into the National Crime Information Center, which then ultimately feeds into NICS, which is a National Instant Criminal Background Check System. And I am not saying that a whole bunch more, so I'm going to be calling it NICS. But it looks at a bunch of different types of records to determine if someone is eligible to receive a firearm. So, and it feeds kind of up into the system like this. It gets entered by law enforcement to TCIC, and it all feeds up that way. Now, we know that NICS came about as part of the Brady Act. And it's basically a computerized system to check all kinds of different records, mental health, protective order, other records, all that kind of stuff. The importance of NICS, though, was really tested in 2007 because the Virginia Tech shooter was still able to purchase a firearm because he was not, his prohibiting mental health history was not submitted to NICS. And at that time, many states, and there's still some states, but many states did not share that information on a national or statewide basis even. And so it became an issue as far as how we need to kind of make sure that those things are getting tracked. And so what they did after that was they passed the NICS Act, Record Improvement Act, and improvement program. And basically what this does, it requires the states to report all Brady disqualifiers. And that's basically any of those things that would stop someone from being able to purchase a firearm or receive a firearm. And there's like 9 of them, but the biggies are felony convictions, misdemeanor convictions of domestic violence, health commitment, mental health commitments, and protective orders. Now, in 2015, the GAO, Government Accountability Office, they did this for every state. They weren't just picking on Texas, but they did this for every state. They checked what was at that moment in the protective order file. And we had almost 21,000, but only about 10%, maybe 10.5% actually had one of these Brady indicators to stop someone from being able to get a firearm. And while I know that not every one of the type of protective orders we have in Texas do not qualify for the federal prohibition, I guarantee you more than 10% of them do. So they're just, we got to figure out ways to streamline stuff, and that has kind of become my life's work. But anyway, that's what we got to keep doing. And of course, we want full faith and credit. We want to make sure that they're enforceable, not just in our state, but in other states, and want to be able to force them otherwise as well. Of course, there's my pretty little map. If you are, but if you're born and raised in Texas, that's what your map looks like. And that brings me to our next poll question. Trying to keep y'all awake out there. Okay, who here, if you can actually, first we're going to do, if you can do the show of hands in your little attendee box in the lower right-hand corner, click the hand if this applies to you. Who here was not born and raised in Texas? See, I'm just going to give a couple of seconds, see if anybody's going to play the game with me.
We have a couple coming through.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I'm just gonna say the first name, Daisy Dawn.
Okay,
There's a few others.
good, okay. All right, for my friends who are not born and raised in Texas, I have a poll question, but anybody can answer this one, not just those friends. The poll question is coming up. All right.
All right, so the question is, before you got here, what did you expect? This is a nice, fun one. Kimberly, I'm glad you chose this poll question.
Anybody can weigh in here, not just our friends from out of state.
Got about another 20 seconds. All right, let me go ahead and close the poll. I'll share the results with you all. It looks like, it says 36% everybody has a horse. 58% thought that everybody had cowboy boots, hats, and belt. That sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
56% said everybody has guns. 13% said everybody has an oil well or had. And then 27% says desert, tumbleweeds, and flat.
So I have a confession. I was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas. Lived there all my life, did law school there, undergrad there, everything. But I married a Yankee. And not just any Yankee, born and raised in Buffalo, New York until he was 14 years old. And luckily when I met him, it was 10 years later. So there was really no no New York accent to speak of, but he still has problems with the guide to using y'all. So I always put this up as a PSA for everybody. But when I asked him, he was like, yes, we totally thought that everybody, rode horses to school. Everybody had to wear boots. I mean, all of those crazy, crazy things. And my deal is like, what is wrong with y'all or all y'all? And so basically this is us. So on that note, I have to share this video that my husband found for me to share with y'all.
Bud Light presents Real Men of Genius. Real Men of Genius. Today we salute you, Mr. Way Too Proud of Texas Guy. Mr. Way Too Proud of Texas Guy. Men from lesser states may know their state's capital, but you know your state's bird, tree, and even reptile. Now that holy toad. You display your pride with your Lone Star tattoo, native Texan bumper sticker, and contempt for any state that doesn't start with Tex and end with is. Sure, there are 49 other states in the Union, but they're smaller, wussier, and the people talk funny. Yankee wussy. So crack open an ice cold Bud Light, oh lover of the Lone Star State, because all that flag waving must have made you mighty thirsty. Bud Light beer, Houston, Texas.
So yes, that's kind of ridiculous, but it's one of these deals where I always have to share that because I have to let everybody know that he found it for me. My husband did. He probably regretted it for the first couple of weeks because then I would chase him around the house singing Yankee wussy, so because clearly I'm a delight to live with. So I always want to make sure that I remind him of his Yankee stature. But definitely one of the biggies is that everybody's got a firearm, and a lot of us do. Not all of us, but there are definitely some laws that we have to worry about when it comes to our protective orders. It is only discretionary for magistrates' orders of emergency protection to forbid possession of a firearm, but it is mandatory that they suspend a state handgun license. Now, when it comes to full regular protective orders under the Family Code, it is mandatory. Cannot possess a firearm or ammunition pursuant to the Family Code. Now, the federal version is a little different. a qualifying protective order for it to count as a Brady disqualifier is the order has to be issued after notice and an opportunity for hearing. Well, that happens in regular protective orders under the family code, but we know that, there's like maybe 10 seconds notice for the accused in a magistrate's order of emergency protection, and there is no hearing in that. So those would not necessarily qualify under federal. It also has some very specific relationships. It's not nearly as broad as what we have. In Texas, it's intimate partner or the intimate partner's child. And so it makes it it does kind of make it a little more narrow. Now, under the NICS Act Record Improvement Project, here at OCA, we did a study, and I harassed probably some of you on this webinar right now about what are some of the obstacles that you deal with when you're dealing with protective orders and when you're reporting protective orders and what the problems are. Decentralized court system, missing data sheets, protective order data sheet have conflicting information, and unaware of other participants' roles in the process. So one of the things that we have that's been discussed is mandatory uniform forms, and that is something that might actually happen because there is a protective order registry bill that just passed and was signed by the governor, and OCA is going to be creating a protective order registry, and that's going to, by necessity, is going to have to happen. So there's a bunch of different things that we can be doing. And so this is just to kind of think in terms of what do you do in your jurisdiction, making sure you're getting all the information you need to have in order to make good decisions. Certainly when it comes to magistrate's orders of emergency protection, some jurisdictions get some very little information, others get a whole lot of information. The more information you can get, the better. Confirming data sheet information and compare to make sure they don't conflict with the actual protective order. Like I said, our electronic copy, always a good thing. Meet with all the people who touch your protective orders. I don't care what agency they're with. Talk about it. Be able to figure out what you can do to streamline the process for each other is always a good thing. Making sure that law enforcement is receiving everything. And if you are able to do that, then you can at least kind of confirm, where things are going and when it gets entered. So the more that you can look at some of these ideas of what you need to do, I highly recommend. There we go. These are recent-ish, and we talked about some of these already. The deadline for law enforcement to enter the order used to be 10 days. We have no idea why that was. And that was changed to 3 days, and we already talked about these other two. We also have from last session where the judge can order, if it's a confidential address, can order the clerk to go ahead and maintain a separate record just for use by the court and law enforcement agency that has all the full information, including all the full addresses, not just marked confidential, and not to release it to the suspect. And so that was for regular protective orders last session. This session, we were able to get, it's been sent to the governor for signature, has been passed to apply it also to magistrate's orders. This session, we already talked about this. And so keep an eye on, and I have a feeling we'll probably be doing some webinars on some of this a little bit later on as well. Very quickly, and y'all can read and you'll be able to come back to this, but we know that this is Sutherland Springs. We know that the military really dropped the ball on not reporting this shooter's family violence history, domestic violence history. And for that reason, he was able to actually go to the academy down the street from my house and buy his firearm. And so the problem becomes, we know that misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence are definitely something that prevents someone from getting a firearm. But what exactly is a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence? Well, it used to be, and what I was always told is that it needed to be at least a Class A in Texas. It needed to be an injury case. But that is not what it is. It's use or attempted use of force. And of course, the relationship situation is definitely more stringent as well. But the biggest problem I see is, I'm hoping we can do something to address some of this stuff, is when someone's convicted on an offense, they do a disposition form at the court. They actually do it through the police department, prosecutors, and the court. And this is how old this thing is. It says, press hard, you're making 3 copies. I just had to share that because it made me laugh. But there's this one little spot on this disposition form, and it's right there. It says domestic violence offense, yes or no. The problem is we don't really know specifically what that relationship is, and some of those relationships are not necessarily going to qualify. And so being able to make sure that we have that is really important. The other part of it is that, you know, we used to think it had to be Class A, but under Castleman, the Supremes did it and said, confirmed, it can be pushing, grabbing, shoving. Does not need to be strong or violent force. So definitely our Class C's count. But the problem becomes it's not necessarily identified in most people's court records. I will tell you that that is probably going to need to come to an end pretty quick, because all of that stuff now, even for Class C level cases, is going to be required to be done. And it has to be on all the records, the charging document, plea agreement, any other, the sentence, the judgment, all of that. Now, state law currently does not require it, but San Antonio started about a year ago, and then Dallas started in the fall. And what they did is they made sure staff received DPS training so that they could do everything they needed to do, including getting fingerprints, doing all of that stuff like you would on any higher level offense. And I have a feeling we're going to have more on this later. But HB 1528 was just passed by the House and the Senate on its way to the governor, that requires reporting of fine-only family violence cases, convictions to DPS. So really important. And then these other ones are important too, but that's the biggie right there. So certainly we want to make sure we keep firearms out of the hands of dangerous people. Also, we want to make sure we know about those family violence convictions, because a later Class A can be enhanced to a 3rd degree felony, even if that prior offense is a Class C family violence conviction. And of course, we want to avoid that as much as possible. And that's me. Please email me, call me if you have questions, concerns. And we want to make sure that we get all of the information that we possibly can to all of you. Want to check and see. I know I've kind of gone a little bit long. I'm sorry.
We're good, Kimberly. Let's go ahead and open this about 5 minutes for Q&A, if you're open to that.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, first I just want to say thank you, Kimberly, for joining us. The questions have been pouring in, so I'm just going to go ahead and go through them. Somebody is asking, are there group homes for juveniles?
Specifically for family violence?
Let's just say, I guess they didn't specify, but let's just go ahead and say that's something for family violence. Then.
There are group homes, but I don't know that specifically for family violence. That is certainly something that I would imagine probably more in your jurisdiction. The best people to answer that question for your jurisdiction are going to be your juvenile probation officers and corrections. And so they would probably be able to let you know specifically what is out there in your jurisdiction, but I believe there is.
Great. Here's another question. If it is not being sent, I think they're referring to the protective orders. If it is not being sent by the following business day, what should we do? We have to wait on the TCIC to be ran.
Well, you've got to have whatever processes you have in place. You want to make sure that you are going through and getting all the information. Now, there's a specific exception in the law that says that if you are still trying to get all the basic information that you possibly can to get it entered into the system before you forward it, then that's going to be an exception. But basically, it's as soon as you possibly can to get it done.
Great. We got some good comments. I just want to say thank you, Kimberly, for doing this presentation.
Sure.
It looks like we're kind of hitting on time, so let me just go over a few last minute details. First, I just want to say, Kimberly, thank you for joining us. This was a really important topic to get out to our communities. Just want to say thank you once again.
Thank you so much for having me.
We had a few of y'all asking about the PowerPoint slides. These PowerPoint slides I will email out to all of the attendees, so you guys will receive that this week or early next week. And I also did mention prior to beginning that we will also post it on our website. So now you can actually go to oca.com, go to publication and training, and there'll be a drop down to webinars. And we post all of our monthly webinars on that page.
I will also supply some other materials that I specifically discussed that as part of something that can be sent out with
Oh,
slides.
perfect. Okay, awesome. So we'll send that. And we do have more questions coming in. Go ahead and continue bringing the questions in. You also have a chance at the very end. Please, I encourage you to fill out the evaluation form. It just allows us to improve on our webinars. And if you have more questions pertaining to this topic that we did not address, go ahead and use the comment box and write your question there, and I'll make sure that they get to Kimberly, and she will email you personally with the response to that.
Yes, or email me, that my stuff is right there.
Perfect. Well, thank you once again, everybody. And I think that's the last slide. So
I think so.
you guys have a great afternoon and join us next month for a new webinar.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.